In this video, I want to take a look at some of the controls that you have when you're in mode dial. I typically shoot in manual shooting mode, so when it goes to the mode dial, my last time I was here, I was using manual shooting mode, but I can change that, of course, to the priority modes or IO auto. So if I click on the M down here in the lower right-hand corner, you see I auto, P for program, A for aperture priority, S for shutter priority, M for manual, and the little icon of a film projector for video. So we'll leave it in manual for now. And that means that I have control over the shutter speed. If I click on 125, which is set at it's set now at 1/125th of a second, I can change that to 60th of a second and change my aperture from f2.8 rather to f4. So I've just compensated and closed down the aperture a stop, so it's the same as it was before. I can also change the ISO. So if I click on this 200, which is the native ISO of the camera, I can go to low, which is a simulated 100 ISO, or I can go up to 400. That's going to make it very bright, as you can see. The camera's pointed out at a tree right now. There have been a bunch of robins scattering about. I was hoping I might be able to get one. And let me go back to 200. In the middle here, it shows me how much I'm under or overexposed. It's very faint. It's grayish white lettering, which is one thing I wish Olympus would fix and make that darker. That's basically giving me an indication of whether I'm getting too much light or not enough light. But now it's telling me 0, 0, which means it's telling me that this is actually perfectly exposed. In my opinion, it's a little bit too bright. So I'm going to go back to f4. I typically do shoot at a third of a stop under, or even a whole stop under. So if I go to f5.6, which is another stop, you can see it gets much darker. Let's go one more. All right, so that I can control my aperture, my shutter speed through these by hitting either shutter speed or aperture, and then I can roll these around and change them if I want to. And tap on the screen to make that go away. And then the other indicators that are on here, if they're turned on in the display mode, and by default they are the level. So this is the level, the horizontal level, and it's showing me I'm a little bit off level, and that's how your ear is positioned in your hand or on a tripod. And I have it on a little tripod right now. And this is showing me the vertical level, and it's obviously way off level vertically because I'm pointing up into the tree a little bit. So if I brought it down a little bit, that would turn to a green line. And these are controlled by the display button. So if I click on display, it's still there. Those level indicators are still there, but you can barely see, probably can't see very well, but it's put up a grid on the screen. So I can tell quadrants of the screen. So I could use rule of thirds or anything like that. And remember, those were items that we controlled from the settings menu grid. And right now I have it set to squared. We'll just leave it like that, because that's where that's controlled, and this is where it shows up. If I hit the display button, a display icon again, the grid and the levels went away. So if I click the display button again, I get the grid with no levels, and if I click it again, I get the levels and no grid. So you can cycle through different settings if you want. This icon right here is the self timer. So if I put that on, it's now on, and I can choose to go from 2 seconds up to 12 seconds, and it's defaulting to about 6. So if I press the button, let's put it at 2. Let's slide it over. If I tap here, it's changed the focus there. If I hit the shutter button, see, it starts a countdown from 0, 1, 2, poof, and takes the picture. So that's how that works. And then it quickly shows me 1 second preview. So I'm going to turn that off. It says off. And the icon next to that is a digital teleconverter, and it's set to 1x, which is just normal. So if I wanted my lens, which is a 16mm macro, to be doubled, I could turn that to 2x, and now it's zooming in to an effective focal length of, say, 60 times 2 is 120, times 2 is 240, so a 240 millimeter focal length. And there's 1x. And this little grid up here lets me change the drive mode. It lets me change the picture mode, and it shows up down here in the bottom. So here's picture mode is selected, and the different modes are down here. This is where I can go to monotone if I want to, and now the scene is actually displayed in black and white. So I'm going to go back to 3, which is the normal natural color mode. And then I'm going to go to, this is the metering mode, and again I can choose down here one of 3 different metering modes. I'm just leaving it on the full matrix mode. And then this is face detection, on or off, and I have it on off. And here is focusing mode. By clicking that down here, I'm seeing the focusing with the option for manual focusing. And I can turn it all the way to manual focus, but that means that I have to turn the focus on the lens itself, so I'm not using that. I can go to aspect ratio, and again, these were things that we had access to in the standalone menu setting menu as well. So 4x3, 16 by 9, 16 by 9, 3x2, which is what I have it set at now, and 1x1, which is a square. So I'll go to 4x3, which is the native aspect ratio of the Air. And let's go back up to this first one, which was drive mode, and it's on single, and the option is to do continuous. So that's where the frame, X number of frames per second would come into play. So we'll leave that as it is, and if I click on this again, it goes away. If I go now to my shooting mode and go to, let's say, aperture priority, which is a popular shooting mode for most photographers, things are going to change a little bit on the screen, because now I don't have access to the shutter speed control, only the aperture control. So I can change aperture and no shutter speed shows up, as you'll see, but I can change it from f4, let's go to f5.6, and I can change, so if I click on the screen now, that goes away, and it's set at f5.6, tells me that right here, and it's telling me which shutter speed the camera is selecting, and the best I can see, it's 1/50. The next digit here is telling me my exposure compensation. So if I think that's a little bit too dark, I can go into exposure compensation and make it a little bit brighter. See how it really blows it out. Or I can make it underexposed. And it's showing me, and now it's very, very underexposed, very dark. It's showing me as I move this what the exposure compensation value is, and it's displaying it right above. And I can go to ISO right here. Oops, come on, ISO. And I can change the ISO if I want to. So I could go to 400, and that's going to make it way overexposed as well. Well, it didn't make it too much. Well, it's not going to, because it's always trying to achieve a 0 exposure, which is, if I want to shoot at 400, then I can do that. You can see the birds moving out there, right? So let's go back to, oops, go back to 200, because it's a bright day and we don't need a 400. All right, so that is in aperture priority. The same sort of thing would happen in shutter priority, except of course you would be able to change the, so if I click up here, you can change the shutter speed, but not the aperture, and you can adjust the aperture only by using exposure compensation. All right, so let's now go to video. So in video mode, number one, the screen compresses. It's not 4x3 anymore. It's looks more like a 3x2 or 16 by 9. But one of the things I wanted to point out here that I wasn't aware of, because again it's dimmed and difficult to see, but if I choose video, as I have, or no, it's not dimmed, it's right here. So if I want to, if the scene seems a little bit too dark for me, then I can change the exposure compensation. I could overexpose it by +2, and that would make, there it was, got much brighter. It takes a second for it to register. or if I want to underexpose it by a stop, let's say, I can put it down there. That's going to make it darker. So if you're trying to shoot video inside, you can use this exposure compensation in video mode to override that and get a little bit more light into the scene. So I'm going to put it back at 0 right there. And that's how that control works in video. So I'm going to go back to, let's go to program mode. In program mode, you turn that selection screen off by hitting the program, the mode that you've chosen. In program mode, I can only change, I can't change shutter speed or aperture directly. The camera is choosing aperture or shutter speed, or the aperture or shutter speed. But if I want to override that, I can use exposure compensation right here, and I can change my ISO. And that, I think, covers all of the items that are on the shooting screen when you are in the mode dial. And go back to the little house, and that puts me back in the main menu. Thank you very much.